I once believed my mother would die for me, not for money. That illusion shattered the day I lay curled on a hospital bed, lungs thick with disinfectant and pain, and heard her whisper outside my door to my stepfather, "At least the girl's death policy will pay out nicely." My heart didn't break from the burns still festering across my skin. It broke because truth was gnawing me apart, one cruel bite at a time. I had survived the flames they hired someone to start, flames meant to kill me. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, you're dead wrong. Hit subscribe now so you won't miss the haunting true stories we're about to bring to life. She woke to the sterile bite of antiseptic and the hiss of oxygen pushing through narrow tubes. A fluorescent light trembled above her, washing everything in a colorless haze that made it impossible to tell if it was morning or night. The edges of the ceiling panels were smudged with grime, as if hope itself had tried to crawl out and given up halfway. Somewhere nearby, a machine beeped in rhythm with her heartbeat, a mechanical reminder that she was still here, still clinging to something that might pass for life. Sophia Reynolds lay wrapped in stiff, scratchy hospital sheets, her body aching in places that didn't seem to belong to her anymore. A thick bandage climbed from her collarbone down past where she could see, wrapping her ribs, her side hugging her skin with a pressure that felt both protective and suffocating. She couldn't remember how she got here. Only Flicker's heat blistering against her face, the crackling roar of flames swallowing her home, a scream torn from her throat that felt like it hadn't ended yet. Rain slapped at the wide windows of her hospital room, relentless Portland's cold bite pressing against the glass as if trying to crawl inside. Each drop was a tiny percussion layering over the steady, emotionless beep of the monitor. Her eyes flicked toward the sound, but moving even that much sent spikes of pain through her skull, dancing behind her eyes like cruel fireworks. She wanted to close her eyes, sink back under, let the darkness have her. But voices drifted in from the hallway, thin and sharp, cutting through the fog that threatened to swallow her whole. "Not what we planned, Mark." Her mother's voice said taut and high, the vowels stretched with irritation, not fear. Mark, her stepfather, that name coiled inside her like a cold snake. "I know, but the payout isn't in question. Insurance already ruled it accidental." His voice was calm, measured the same way he'd explained quarterly profits at the dinner table when she was 16, bragging about investors while she picked at her salad. "But it's less. You know it is. Because she's still—" Her mother paused. Sophia strained pain, tugging at the edges of her consciousness, but she needed to hear. "Alive," her mother finished flat, almost disgusted. "Less because she's still alive." Sophia felt her body seize. The heart monitor beside her jumped, stuttering before it fell back into rhythm. Her lungs burned, but the machines kept pushing oxygen into her, whether she wanted it or not. "We can't control everything," Lena Mark murmured, placating. The edge of a laugh twisted through his words. "Besides, if complications come up, it could change." Silence. Then the soft, shuffling sound of shoes on tile. Sophia imagined them standing there just beyond her door, maybe glancing through the tiny window to where she lay broken and wrapped in gauze. Did they see her as a person at all anymore? Or just a miscalculation in their neat little plan? Her mother spoke again, colder now. "I just didn't think she'd be so stubborn. Even on the brink. She always was." A small sound, a smile in Mark's throat. "Remember how she tried to run away that night you took her phone, 14, and thought she was clever?" Sophia's breath caught. The memory was jagged, her mother's hand around her wrist nails biting into her skin, dragging her back into the house by her hair. The threats that came afterward whispered through locked doors. "You think anyone else would want a damaged girl like you?" A tear broke free, slipping hot down her temple to the pillow. Her head wouldn't turn, her body wouldn't move. Only her heart thrashed wildly, fighting against the cage of her ribs. Outside, the rain lashed harder, Portland streets awash in gray. A truck backfired somewhere distant, echoing like gunfire through the corridors of her mind. The voices at her door dropped hushed to conspiratorial murmurs she couldn't untangle. A cruel gift. They'd already given her more than enough to understand. Alive, less money, complications. They were disappointed she hadn't died. Her stomach lurched. Sophia's mind skittered across images of her house, the warm smell of cinnamon rolls she used to bake when she was bored, the soft couch she'd curled up on to read, even the old porch swing that squeaked under her weight. All of it gone, charred black, ash drifting through the air like ghosts. And they wanted it. They had planned for it, had paid for it. The machine beside her beeped again, accusing loud in the silent room. She tried to slow her breathing to stop the trembling that made the IV line twitch where it pierced her skin. Each inhale was a shallow cut burning around the bandages. Tears pooled in her ears, but she couldn't wipe them away. Couldn't do anything but lie there and listen to her mother and stepfather barter her life like bad stock options. "She's resilient, I'll give her that," Mark said after a while, almost admiring. "Resilient doesn't pay the mortgage." Her mother's voice broke, then a hairline crack in the ice. "It was supposed to be enough to cover everything. You promised me." "Hey," the low, intimate tone Mark always used when pulling her mother close in the kitchen, hands on her hips. "We'll figure it out. We always do." A pause, then the squeak of leather as someone shifted the faint click of a purse clasp. Sophia imagined her mother reapplying lipstick in the reflection of her hospital door. Always perfect, even when orchestrating the slow bleed of her own daughter's life. Their footsteps faded, swallowed by the soft pad of nurses at their stations, the distant rattle of a medication cart. The door never opened. No one came in to say, "It's okay, sweet girl. We're here now." The way mothers in movies did. The way mothers were supposed to. Sophia stared at the ceiling until her vision doubled, until the waterline of her tears blurred the harsh fluorescent light into trembling stars. The pain was there, yes, hot, searing alive, but under it was something colder, something that felt like stones settling into her bones. They didn't love her, not in the way that mattered, not in any way that counted when survival was on the table. She realized then, truly realized, that she was alone, more alone than she had ever been, even on nights she lay awake in her childhood bedroom listening to them fight about bills and who was dragging who down. A noise escaped her throat, broken and low, barely human. It might have been a sob or a laugh or both crushed together by the weight of betrayal. The heart monitor answered its pace, jumping to track her distress. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse's voice floated closer, but no one came in. No one asked if she needed comfort. They were just numbers, pulses, insurance codes on a clipboard. The rain kept falling, a relentless percussion that felt like it might drown the whole world. Sophia closed her eyes against it, against the harsh light, against the raw burn in her chest. She would remember this. She would etch every word, every cold inflection of her mother's disappointment, every casual cruelty of her stepfather's laughter into the marrow of her bones, because one day she would need to know exactly how far they were willing to go. And on that day, she would not be this fragile thing bound in white and fear. But for now, she simply lay there, tears leaking into her hair, heart battering itself bloody against her ribs, and let the truth carve itself into her deep, indelible forever. The days blurred together, measured not by sunrises or sunsets. She could barely see them from her window, but by the slow shift of shadows across the ceiling tiles and the hollow clink of medication trays. Her body recovered at a pace that felt almost cruel. Every inch of skin seemed to protest the betrayal of healing, reminding her with each tug of the gauze how close she'd come to not waking at all. Sophia had thought pain would be the worst part, but it wasn't. The worst was the waiting. The way each heartbeat stuttered under her ribs terrified something else was coming. That if she closed her eyes for too long, they'd simply stop pumping morphine into her veins, slip something else into the IV instead, and finish what they started. Her mother and Mark didn't visit again that week. The nurses offered pitying smiles, but none of them lingered. Even pity had a limit in places like this. Besides, who wanted to waste it on the girl in room 214, whose mother's insurance claim had been whispered about behind clipped, polite hands? Sophia learned quickly to read every look, every hesitation. People thought silence was empty, but it was full of meaning, of weight, of hidden things. It didn't take long for her to realize the staff knew more than they let on. They would stand outside her door murmuring in that professional hush that was supposed to sound caring, but really just guarded them from lawsuits. She would catch words like arson, questionable circumstances, pending investigation. But none of it ever led to someone pulling up a chair at her bedside and saying, "You're safe. We believe you. We'll keep them away." No, that wasn't how the world worked. So Sophia decided she would have to keep herself safe. It started small, a spark of instinct. When the young nurse with the ponytail Lindsay her badge read came in to change the dressing, her phone buzzed with a notification that made her huff under her breath. Sorry, family group chat. Always drama. She laid the phone face down on Sophia's rolling table. Sophia waited until Lindsay turned her back hands deep in sterile gloves. Then she slid her own phone, cracked and still smelling faintly of burnt plastic from the fire, out from under her pillow. Her hands shook skin tight and raw where it wasn't bandaged, but she managed to swipe to record. Just in time, the nurse picked up her phone again, thumbed in her code, and pressed call back without hesitation. It took a few seconds before a voice crackled through, and it wasn't Lindsay's family. It was the front desk patching through another call. "Yes, put her through," Lindsay said, sounding impatient. Sophia's heart began to pound. She kept her phone under the sheet recording, terrified even her pulse might be too loud. Then her mother's voice filled the small room floating out from Lindsay's speaker. Smooth, sweet, practiced. Is she improving? I need to know how long we'll be expected to keep this charade going. Sophia nearly dropped her phone. A long pause. The nurse's eyes darted to Sophia's vitals, then away. She adjusted the IV drip with unnecessary fuss. We don't discuss patient specifics over unsecured lines, ma'am. Oh, don't be tedious. I'm her mother. The word cracked like glass. Listen, we've had enough surprises. I was assured the policy wouldn't be contested if she didn't linger. I need to know, is she getting better or worse? Sophia squeezed her eyes shut, bile rising. Worse, they were hoping, counting on it. Ma'am, I can't. Very well. Just keep me informed if anything changes. Mark will be by with additional paperwork. Click. The line went dead. Lindsay stood very still, her face tight, then turned and forced a smile at Sophia. Sorry about that. Insurance nonsense. Just family worrying. Sophia didn't reply. Couldn't. She lay there, the phone buzzing slightly in her palm from adrenaline. Once Lindsay left, she hit stop, then replayed the recording, forcing herself to hear it again and again, until every syllable branded itself into her memory. She'd have proof. If anything happened to her again, if she slipped into unconsciousness and didn't wake, there would be something left that said, this is why. That night was the longest of her life. She couldn't sleep. Every time her lids drooped, she saw flames licking under her bedroom door again, smelled burning drywall, heard her own screaming echo off childhood photos. She'd jerk awake, gasping heartbeat, a jagged mess on the monitor. Eventually, she gave up. She unlocked her phone, ignoring the low battery warning, and scrolled to the one thing that could still anchor her, the photos of her grandmother. Her grandmother had lived on the Oregon coast in a weather-worn little house that smelled like lavender and lemon polish. Summers with her had been golden, free from the clipped criticisms of her mother or Mark's oily smiles. Sophia would run barefoot across splintery deckboards, her grandmother's laughter trailing behind her, a sound more soothing than any lullaby. She pulled up a photo from that last summer. Her grandmother's thin hair whipped around her face by the salt-wind eyes, crinkled hand on Sophia's shoulder. The ocean behind them was a roiling gray that day, not unlike the rain battering her hospital window now. You have to live long enough to protect yourself, Sophia, her grandmother had told her once, voice rough from age but still iron underneath. Not everyone who says they love you actually does, and it's up to you to decide what that means. Sophia stared at that picture until tears blurred it. The words replayed over and over, not as memory but as command. She couldn't let this be the end of her story. Couldn't let her mother stand at a funeral and dab fake tears while collecting sympathy and insurance checks. Couldn't let Mark pat her casket like a job well done. Her hand tightened around the phone knuckles, whitening. Pain shot up her arm, a reminder that she was still here, that her heart, traitorous as it felt, kept beating. Sophia closed her eyes and let the ache settle deep. When she opened them again, they were dry, focused, the shaking stilled. No, she wouldn't die for them. She'd live and one day make sure they knew exactly what it cost to try to bury her alive. That was the first quiet promise she made to herself. A vow forged alone in a dim hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and betrayal. A promise that felt stronger than family, stronger than fear. And it was only the beginning. The day Sophia left the hospital, Portland was draped in drizzle. That soft, perpetual mist that blurred windshields and made the entire world seem hesitant to take a clear shape. The nurse at the front desk gave her a thin smile as she signed her discharge forms, a smile too polite to be concerned and too practiced to be genuine. She stepped outside in borrowed sweats that still smelled faintly of disinfectant. The cold hit her like a reprimand. Her skin tightened around healing burns, making her gasp, but she forced her feet down the walkway toward the curb where Mark's silver SUV idled. Its wipers swept in rigid intervals, slicing the world into wet fragments. Her mother didn't get out to help. Instead, the passenger window whirred down just enough to let her voice slip out. "Well, are you coming?" Sophia bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. Then she climbed into the back seat without a word. Mark didn't glance back, only adjusted the mirror, once eyes meeting hers with cool detachment, before he pulled into traffic. The drive was silent except for the soft drone of talk radio. Her mother occasionally tapped at her phone thumb, moving in brisk little jabs. Sophia watched the raindrops chase each other down the glass. It was easier than looking at the woman who'd tried to have her erased. Their new rental was smaller than the house that had burned, a 2-story off Burnside with peeling blue paint and a porch sagging under years of neglect. The irony wasn't lost on Sophia. They'd traded her childhood home for something cheaper, more temporary, despite the payout they'd secured by nearly killing her. Mark popped the trunk. "Grab your own bag," he muttered, already halfway to the door. Sophia's hospital-issued duffel was pathetically light. A change of clothes, some prescription bottles, her phone charger. Nothing that felt like home. Nothing that could have survived the fire even if they'd wanted it to. Inside the house smelled faintly of mildew trying to masquerade as lemon cleaner. Her mother led the way upstairs. "You can have the smaller room," she said, pushing open a door with chipped white paint. "No point paying for a bigger place with all the hospital bills. Besides, you're not exactly working yet, are you?" Sophia nodded once, fighting the sour taste climbing her throat. She stepped inside the narrow room and closed the door behind her, leaning against it as her knees threatened to give. The walls were bare save for a single nail where a picture had once hung, leaving a pale rectangle like a ghost. The carpet was flattened in spots, a memory of someone else's furniture. She sank onto the edge of the mattress, hard wrapped in thin floral sheets that smelled like stale dryer sheets. For a moment, she let her head fall into her hands, shoulders shaking, though no tears came. She'd emptied herself of tears weeks ago. Then slowly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the tiny recording device she'd ordered online from her hospital bed under the guise of listening to audiobooks. It was barely the size of her thumb, matte black with a single button. Easy to hide, easier to plant. She rolled it between her fingers, feeling its weight. This would be how she stayed alive, not just by breathing, but by collecting the truth, building an arsenal no insurance adjuster or defense attorney could spin. Sophia rose on legs that still ached, opened the door, and padded softly down the hall to the living room. Her mother and Mark were there, heads bent over a laptop that perched on a cheap pine coffee table. "Where's your phone?" Her mother snapped the question the second she appeared. "In my room," charging Sophia lied with practiced ease. "Why?" Her mother's eyes narrowed, calculating. Then she waved her off. "Just don't use the Wi-Fi for anything stupid. We're on a limited plan." Sophia forced a thin smile, of course. They went back to their screen, too engrossed to see her slip around behind the couch, press the recorder's single button until a tiny red light glowed, then tuck it under the table's edge with a strip of sticky putty she'd prepared in her pocket. She pulled her sleeve down over her wrist to hide the tremor that had started again. It was always worse when she was near them, the tremor, the sense her bones might snap under the weight of pretending. At dinner, they sat around a rickety dining table that wobbled each time someone lifted a fork. Her mother had made pasta, overcooked swimming in jarred sauce, and poured herself a generous glass of wine before she even served plates. Sophia pushed her noodles around with her fork, listening. Always listening. The Costa Rica property Mark was saying, mouth half full. "We could put down earnest money next month. The payout's been sitting long enough. If we keep it here, we'll bleed it out on taxes." Her mother sipped her wine lipstick, staining the rim. "We'd have to move quickly, though. The buyers in Tamarindo aren't waiting." And a flick of her eyes towards Sophia, who pretended deep fascination with her plate. "If she needs more treatments, it'll cut in. She's already cost enough." "It's under control," Mark said smoothly. "The policy paid what it was supposed to. More if you think about it. We got a sympathy boost since she survived." A thin laugh from her mother. "Right, sympathy." She twisted the stem of her wineglass knuckles, whitening. "If only people knew how long we've been carrying her. Always some drama. School bills, her little breakdowns." Sophia kept her face neutral. Inside, something cold and electric coiled tighter. The hand holding her fork wanted to shake, to snap, to throw it across the table and scream. Instead, she pierced a piece of penne, lifted it to her mouth, and let it sit on her tongue until the taste turned to paste. "I'm grateful, you know," she said finally, her voice small, careful, "for letting me stay until I get on my feet." Her mother's eyes softened just enough to be patronizing. "Of course, darling. Family sticks together. We just all need to pull our weight this time." Sophia nodded. Inside, she marked every word like a tally against them. They didn't notice how her hand slid under the table, every so often checking to be sure the recorder's light was still glowing. They didn't hear the silent promise pulsing through her veins with every beat of her battered heart. "You think you're building a future on my ashes. You have no idea what I'm about to become." Later that night, long after dishes clinked in the sink and Mark's laugh floated down the hall from the living room TV, Sophia lay awake in that narrow bed. The recorder was safe, nestled in her shoe under the bed frame. Her phone sat on her chest, glowing softly. She scrolled through old photos of her grandmother's porch by the sea, the wide skies of Oregon that promised an entire horizon untouched by her mother's schemes. She pressed her free hand over her ribs, feeling the throb of her wounds like an echo. Each pulse said the same thing. Live long enough to make this right. She would, no matter how long it took. Sophia learned quickly how to slip back into the role they expected of her. At home, she moved with a fragile carefulness that matched the bruises still fading across her ribs. She shuffled around the house in soft slippers, head lowered a ghost, haunting the edges of her mother's new kitchen. Every now and then, Lena would toss her a glance, eyes scanning Sophia's bandages, perhaps for guilt, perhaps for inventory, but never quite settling long enough to mean concern. Mark simply ignored her, except for the occasional grunt that passed for acknowledgement. That suited Sophia fine. The less he noticed, the better. She pretended she was still too weak for a real job, still lost in a fog of narcotics and medical bills. The act gave her space to slip out during the day under the guise of short walks for fresh air, a doctor's suggestion that her mother found too minor to argue with. But instead of strolling through the leafy avenues of northeast Portland, Sophia found herself standing one damp Wednesday morning outside a small office on the edge of the industrial district. The sign above the door read, "Garrison and May Private Investigations." The letters were sun-faded, and one was chipped, but to Sophia it gleamed like a portal. Inside it smelled of stale coffee and cold printer ink. A young woman at the front desk raised her eyebrows as Sophia stepped in, clutching the CV she'd printed at a library terminal the day before. It was thin-padded with vague admin experience, light enough to look desperate, exactly the image she needed. "I'm looking to see if you might need an assistant, even an unpaid trainee. I'm trying to rebuild after a lot," she said, letting her voice break slightly. That part wasn't hard. Her voice had already learned to fracture on command. The receptionist studied her for a moment, then nodded toward an open door. "That's Drew. He decides if anyone's worth bothering with." Drew Garrison was a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that darted over Sophia like they were scanning a suspect, typing, filing, making coffee. "Yes, absolutely. And learning. I can do late hours, whatever you need." She let her shoulders curl in hands, twisting her purse strap. I need a chance." He exhaled through his nose, then jerked his head toward a battered metal chair. "Sit. Tell me why you want to work for a PI instead of, a grocery store." Sophia hesitated, chose her truth carefully. "Because people lie. And I need to understand how to find what's hidden, how to see what's underneath." That apparently was the right answer. Drew smirked, tapped a pen against his notepad. "All right, 3 days a week. You'll scan old files, do background checks, sort receipts. If you prove useful, we'll see." She didn't breathe until she was back on the street, clutching the little stack of intake paperwork to her chest. Then she let out a sound that was half relief, half feral determination. Her days fell into a rhythm. In the morning, she wore her mask at home, quiet, limping, wincing if her mother so much as looked her way. By 9:30, she was out the door telling them she needed time to process things, code that Lena was happy to accept because it meant Sophia stayed out of the way. At Garrison and May, she shed the ghost. Drew's team was small and perpetually underwater, grateful for any warm body that could answer phones and alphabetize property lien records. Between coffee runs, she soaked up everything: how they traced license plates through obscure public registries, how they compared hotel receipts with phone GPS pings to catch cheating spouses. The buzz of it filled her veins in a way painkillers never could. Sometimes Drew would lean over her shoulder, his cologne sharp and his breath smelling of cheap breath mints. Bank account dives. "Look for patterns, big cash deposits that don't match reported income. You'll see how people hide what they're ashamed of. Follow the shame." She nodded, eyes locked on transaction logs that blurred after hours, the digits running together. But it was a language she was learning to read, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to secrets. One afternoon, while she was cross-referencing a stack of quarterly statements with a cluttered spreadsheet of LLC registrations, Drew slapped a thick folder down beside her elbow. "Real estate shell games. Learn this. You'll be shocked how many families keep their nastiest lies hidden under the same roof." Her stomach twisted at the word families. The irony stung like pressing on a burn. Still, she cracked the folder and studied every line, every forged signature. At night, when she returned to the rental, she kept up the performance. Sophia drifted through dinner like a half-formed shadow, nodding when spoken to, sometimes so convincingly fragile that her mother actually sounded pleased. "Look how she needs us." Lena's eyes seemed to say, soft with an almost tender pride, as if their value came from her weakness. But in the long hours between midnight and dawn, her mind refused to settle. When sleep finally took her, it delivered dreams that pulled her back to another coast entirely. She stood barefoot on the weathered planks of her grandmother's porch in Oregon. The sea crashed beyond the dunes, tangling her hair with salt and wind. Her grandmother sat in the old rocker, the one with the paint worn to gray, smiling that small, secret smile Sophia used to think was just for her. "Sweet girl," her grandmother said, voice thinner now than memory should allow. "You have to live long enough to choose who you become. Don't let them carve that choice out of you." Then Sophia would blink and her grandmother was gone, the chair empty, still rocking. The horizon rolled with dark waves that felt as though they might swallow the world. She'd wake with tears already on her cheeks, throat tight, gasping. The rental house was too warm, the air heavy with her mother's floral candles that tried to cover mold in the walls. And for a few disoriented seconds, she let herself believe they might truly care, that maybe she had invented it all. Maybe the stress had warped her memories, twisted her sense of what had been plotted. But each day at Garrison and May reminded her otherwise. Each marital betrayal she typed up, each embezzlement scheme she pieced together, taught her how to build a skeleton of truth out of hidden bones. And every new skill was another brick in the wall that would one day stand between her and the people who still believed she belonged to them. One evening, as rain battered the windows hard enough to rattle them in their frames, she paused in the doorway to the dining room. Her mother and Mark sat across from each other, their heads bent close. A laptop glowed between them, columns of numbers reflecting off their faces. She couldn't make out every word, but snippets floated to her like poisoned confetti. Wire transfer. Panama. No trace if we structure it right. Insurance audit, just a formality. Don't panic. Sophia's hands curled into fists at her sides. She thought of Drew teaching her how to link offshore accounts by following ownership proxies of the rush she felt when it all finally clicked. When Lena looked up with her usual cool smile and said, "You're just in time for leftovers," dear Sophia forced herself to smile back. She sat, picked up her fork, and pushed cold chicken around her plate while inside, something iron was forging itself into shape. The evidence was no longer vague. It wasn't paranoia or the desperate fiction of a wounded mind. It was facts. Documents, numbers, dates, wire routes. Wire. They were criminals, and she would learn exactly how to dismantle them, even if it meant cracking her own heart open to do it. It started with a careless slip on Mark's part. One morning, while Sophia was rinsing a coffee mug in the kitchen, he breezed through on his phone, barking low into the receiver. "Yeah, Doc 9. Don't be late. No surprises tonight, you hear me. I want this done clean." He didn't notice Sophia at the sink. Didn't bother lowering his voice. Didn't even glance her way before grabbing his keys from the counter and slamming the door behind him. Her pulse roared to life. Doc 9. Tonight. She didn't have a plan yet. Not really, only an instinct that had grown sharper and more vicious each day she worked at Garrison and May. If she was going to dismantle them, she needed more than insurance fraud. She needed something that would crack the foundation they'd built their life on. She waited until dusk. When Mark's car finally pulled out of the gravel driveway, Sophia counted to 30 under her breath, steady measured each number, another layer of armor, then snatched her phone and her tiny Canon camera, a battered hand-me-down from Drew, who thought she was just practicing discreet tailing exercises. He didn't know her real target. She followed him with her heart in her throat, headlights dimmed, low hands slick on the wheel. Portland's streets grew narrower, rougher. Warehouses shouldered up to the curb like sleeping giants. Freight yards sprawled in tangles of steel chain link and rust. Mark's taillights finally turned off into a fenced lot. A sign read, "Pearson Sons Logistics Authorized Vehicles Only." Beyond it, rows of stacked shipping containers climbed into the dark like colored tombstones. Sophia parked half a block away. The air stank of diesel and salt. Somewhere nearby, a gull shrieked, offended by her trespass. She tightened her jacket, popped her car door with painstaking quiet, and slipped out into the shadows. The gravel underfoot was treacherous, eager to crunch if she misplaced even a toe. She stayed to the perimeter, weaving between long-haul trucks with tarp-wrapped trailers that smelled like damp rope. Her breath clouded in front of her, quick and shallow. Then she heard them, voices, low-accented Russian, though she only recognized it from snippets at the office fragments Drew would mutter when reading through foreign-owned shell companies. Peeking around a corrugated container, she spotted Mark standing under a sickly yellow floodlight. His back was to her shoulders, relaxed, like he was among old friends. Opposite him were 3 men, all heavy-set, dressed in dark peacoats despite the mild night. One clutched a thick folder. Another smoked the cherry of his cigarette, flaring whenever he took a drag, illuminating slashes of cheekbone and cold eyes. Sophia crouched low, raised her camera. Her hands were unsteady, not from the weight, but from the flood of adrenaline that made her muscles hum. She pressed the shutter, a faint mechanical click. Then again. Closer, she needed closer. She slipped around the container, heart leaping when her shoes scuffed metal. The men didn't turn. One of them laughed a jagged sound. Mark was talking fast now, gesturing toward the folder. Papers flashed in the harsh light. Sophia strained to catch the words. Liquidate the Seattle properties first. The tax shield holds through Q3. After that, we funnel into the restaurant group. A pause. The man with the cigarette flicked ash onto the gravel, his voice thick. And the girls, you promised discretion. We don't need another Tacoma fiasco. Sophia's skin went ice cold, her breath locked up, chest clenching so tight it hurt. Mark gave a smooth chuckle. Handled. The club leases are under a cousin's name. If it folds, nothing traces back. Sophia fought the urge to gag. This wasn't just money. It was people, trafficking or something close to it. Her hands started to tremble so badly she nearly dropped the camera. Carefully, she pressed it tight to her chest, steadying herself, then lifted it again. Snap. Snap. The digital shutter sang like a traitorous little bird. The third man finally spoke. His English was flawless, almost gentle. Good. Then we proceed. But one misstep, Mr. Callahan, and it's your head on the pier, not ours. Mark only smiled, a thin, practiced thing, understood. They shook hands, papers exchanged. Sophia zoomed in, desperately capturing the edge of the documents, a heading in Cyrillic, a faint company logo she didn't recognize, and in one miraculous frame, the partial plate of a black BMW idling behind the men. She was about to slip back into the shadows when Mark turned as if sensing something. His eyes scanned the stack, sweeping right past her hiding place. Sophia flattened herself so hard against the steel that it bit into her shoulder blades. Her breath was a silent prayer. Then he looked away, said something brisk to his companions. One by one, they peeled off boots, crunching down a side lane, disappearing behind walls of containers. Mark walked alone back toward his car. Sophia counted to 20 before daring to move. Her legs threatened to give. She slid down to a crouch, hands pressed to her face, trying to gather herself. The air reeked of old fish and engine oil seeping into her hair, her skin. She wanted to crawl out of it, scrub it off, but there was no time. She pulled herself up, forcing each step not to stumble. Her camera was a lifeline now. Proof. Not just of insurance fraud, of an entire network, money laundering, human exploitation, crimes that would fracture their world so completely no amount of blood money could buy it back. When she reached her car, Sophia practically fell inside, slamming the door and locking it with shaking hands. For a moment, she just sat there, forehead on the steering wheel, sobbing in harsh, ugly bursts. It was too much. It was too enormous. But through the swirl of horror, a darker, sharper thought cut through. Now I know exactly what you are. She wiped her face on her sleeve, started the engine, and drove away with headlights off until she was 3 blocks clear. Only then did she switch them on, heart still galloping. On the way home, every stoplight felt like it lingered just to taunt her, pinning her down in fluorescent red while the images played back over and over in her mind. Mark's easy grin, the Russians' warning, the casual talk of disposal as if lives were just defective inventory to be written off. She clutched the camera tighter. This was her weapon, her shield. Her grandmother had once told her that surviving betrayal didn't mean learning to love again. It meant learning how to stand in the truth without flinching. Well, here was the truth, black and white, pixel by pixel. She would turn it into a blade. When she finally parked in front of the rental, the porch light was on. Her mother's silhouette crossed the window, backlit by a television glow. Sophia sat in the driver's seat for a long time, letting the engine tick down, trying to calm the riot under her skin. Then she tucked the camera into her coat, stepped out into the misty dark, and walked inside, heart still pounding with the knowledge of just how deeply the rot ran. The storm had rolled in heavy that evening, dark clouds pressing low over Portland like a hand on the back of Sophia's neck. Thunder rumbled somewhere distant, slow and deep, the sort of warning growl that made even street dogs slink under porches. Inside the house, the lights flickered every so often, straining against the shifting power. It gave everything a stuttering quality, like reality itself was struggling to stay stable. Mark wasn't home yet. Sophia had listened carefully at the door when he'd left earlier, heard him muttering about an impromptu meeting with the accountants, an opportunity. She waited nearly an hour after his car pulled away, heartbeat ticking out each cautious minute before she moved. The upstairs hallway was dim, just a single lamp casting long shadows that turned the floral wallpaper into grotesque, twisting shapes. Mark's study door stood slightly ajar as if mocking her. He always locked it when he was truly gone for the night. A crack in his discipline, a gift she wasn't going to waste. Sophia stepped inside. The smell was wrong too much. Aftershave stale coffee, the faint chemical bite of printer toner. His world, not hers. The safe was behind a framed print of a schooner battling high waves, cliché enough to make her lip curl. She slid the painting aside with deliberate care, revealing the sleek keypad and matte black steel. She'd watched him type the code once from the hallway mirror's reflection, a small victory that had felt like fire in her veins. 4196, the numbers clicked under her fingers. With a muted thunk, the safe released. Inside folders lay stacked in neat towers. Sophia felt her mouth go dry. Some had labels she could read, even in the half-light Q3 projections Costa Rica assets, a battered envelope simply marked with a $sign. She reached for the envelope first. Papers slid out into her trembling hands. Wire receipts, account balances with long strings of offshore routing numbers, even a slip of notepaper with a Russian name scrawled beside a dollar figure so large it made her knees buckle. Snap! She lifted her phone, took pictures of everything, every slip, every careless trail. Her pulse was a war drum thunderous in her head, drowning out the storm beyond the windows. Then her foot nudged something solid under the desk. She froze. A breath later, she crouched and saw a small lockbox wedged between stacks of old tax folders. Her hands itched. She shouldn't. But if it was hidden even deeper, it might be the one piece that brought everything crashing down. She reached for it. Behind her, the hallway floor creaked. Sophia's entire body went rigid, blood turning to ice. The doorknob shifted a soft clink that sliced through the air sharper than any blade. She shoved the envelope back, slammed the safe, twisted the dial frantically. The combination lock spun too far, teeth missing, forcing her to backtrack. Her fingers felt thick, clumsy, like they belonged to someone else. The door began to open. Light from the hall sliced across the floor in a narrow blade. Sophia stumbled upright. Panic detonated in her chest. Without thinking, she clutched at her side, where the skin was still angry and red from the burns, and let out a strangled gasp. Then she collapsed, smacking her shoulder against the corner of the desk on the way down. Her vision exploded in white. Pain was real, blooming huge and electric through her torso. She seized it, magnified it, let it crack her in half. When she blinked again, Mark was crouched over her, a hand on her cheek shaking slightly. Jesus, Sophia, what the hell were you doing in here? She forced tears to her eyes, let them spill. Her breath came in shallow gasps, chest hitching with manufactured agony. I felt dizzy, was trying to get water, but then I thought maybe they were painkillers. I didn't want to bother Mom. Mark's mouth was a thin line, eyes darting to the safe behind him. He made no move to open it again, but his entire body seemed to harden, settling into that cold shape she knew all too well. "Don't ever come in here again," he said. The softness in his voice was purely cosmetic, layered over steel. "If you need something, you ask." She nodded desperately, cradling her ribs, swallowing sobs that were only half fake now. Because the pain really was screaming through her side. The burn wound throbbed like it wanted to tear open. Mark's hand lingered on her shoulder just a second too long. Then he was gone, striding from the room without another word, door swinging half-closed behind him. Sophia lay there on the carpet for nearly 5 minutes, unable to move, shivering as sweat cooled on her skin. Her phone was still in her pocket, precious photos hidden there, tiny shields against everything they were. Eventually, she forced herself up, each breath a punishment. She staggered back to her room, shut the door, then collapsed face first on the bed. It wasn't over. That night, long after midnight, when the house had settled into its habitual hush pipes, ticking wind breathing through thin window panes, the door to her room opened. Sophia tensed instantly. Her eyes fluttered open, catching the silhouette framed by the hallway's faint glow. Her mother stood there wearing a long satin robe that caught the dim light face, shadowed into an inscrutable mask. For a heartbeat, Sophia thought maybe she'd come to apologize, to ask if she was in pain, to admit something human lived beneath the carefully layered cruelty. But Lena simply walked to the side of the bed and sat. Her perfume drifted over thick and sweet, clogging Sophia's throat. Then cool fingers threaded through Sophia's hair, stroking it back from her damp forehead. The gentleness of it was almost worse than violence. "You have to be smarter than this," her mother whispered. Her voice was low, so soft it might have been mistaken for love if Sophia hadn't known better. "We've all worked too hard to build a future. Don't ruin it with nonsense. You understand me." Sophia swallowed. Her heart thundered so loud it was a miracle Lena couldn't hear. She kept her face, slack eyes wide like a chastened child. "Yes, Mom," she whispered back. A pause. Lena's hand lingered on her hair thumb, brushing along her temple. Then she leaned down close enough that Sophia could see the tiny lines at the corners of her eyes, smell the wine on her breath. "Good," Lena breathed, "because it would be a shame if you made us choose again." She stood, smoothing her robe, and slipped silently from the room. The door clicked shut. Darkness swallowed Sophia whole. She lay there, trembling eyes open and stinging as 2 hot tears slid back into her hair. Her mother's touch still crawled across her scalp. She didn't sob, didn't make a sound, only let the tears spill salt streaks of silent rebellion. Because even as terror laced itself around her spine, binding her tight, another promise was coiling deeper. I will not let you win, even if it means you have to watch everything burn. Sophia didn't remember the drive back to her small rented room above the strip of insurance agencies and discount dental offices. It was as if the streets of Portland blurred into a gray smear, headlights splitting apart raindrops on the windshield in dizzying ribbons. By the time she parked outside the building, her hands were still locked around the steering wheel knuckles white. The staircase creaked under her steps. Her key stuck slightly in the lock, another tiny frustration that clawed at her raw nerves. When she pushed the door open, the scent of stale coffee and printer paper from her day job wrapped around her oddly comforting compared to her mother's suffocating perfume. She clicked the bolt shut behind her and just stood there a moment, chest heaving. The weight of everything, the safe Lena's threats, Mark's dark dealings with men who trafficked in more than just cash, crushed down on her shoulders all at once. Her legs gave out. Sophia slid down to the floor, her back against the door, tears leaking hot and silent. No sobs, just the slow leak of despair that felt too tired to scream. Eventually she pulled herself upright. She didn't come here to collapse. She'd made promises to herself, to the girl she used to be who dreamed of salt air and gentle hands, to the grandmother whose memory still lived in every stubborn heartbeat. She flipped on the overhead light. The room was small, barely wide enough for her narrow bed and a metal desk. Against one wall was a cheap corkboard she'd mounted days ago, telling Drew it was to track cheating husband timelines. Now it was something else entirely. She laid out her gathered evidence on the bed, photos of Mark shaking hands with men whose eyes were hollow with hunger for power, images of license plates she'd captured in that dim shipping yard, the digits sharp and accusing, photocopies of offshore transfer receipts she'd swiped from his safe when she risked everything. Each piece felt like a tiny live wire, dangerous even to touch. Sophia pinned them to the board one by one. String bright red meant for cheap holiday crafts snaked from tack to tack, creating a spiderweb of corruption. At the center, she pinned a photo of Mark she'd secretly taken one evening at dinner. He was laughing, head thrown back, wine glass in hand, a man thoroughly at ease with his own comfort. She stood back, breath shallow. The pattern was there. Money from a silent partner in Moscow funneled through restaurant chains in Tacoma and Seattle, then back out to numbered accounts in the Caymans. Each spoke of the web touched another, shipping manifests, doctored by crooked dock managers, real estate purchases under shell corporations, even vague mentions of Eastern European hospitality contracts that made bile rise in her throat. The truth was uglier than she ever could have prepared for, and yet seeing it laid out like this filled her with a savage satisfaction. It was real. It wasn't her paranoia, her trauma playing tricks. They were monsters. And she finally had proof. She slumped into her chair, letting her head tip back until it thudded against the cracked wall. Her eyes drifted shut. Somewhere behind her eyelids, her grandmother's porch appeared again. Not in sun this time, but shrouded in a soft coastal fog. The rocking chair creaked slowly, though it wasn't moving. Then it was. And there was her grandmother cardigan, pulled tight hair, pinned back eyes, the same storm gray as the sea behind her. But the warmth was gone. Her mouth was a small, sad line. "You were always too tender, Sophia," she said, voice a hush that tangled with the distant roar of waves. "It's why I loved you best, but tenderness won't survive this. It will get you killed." Sophia's throat closed. "I don't want to be like them. I don't want to become that." Her grandmother rocked once the chair, groaning eyes not leaving Sophia's. "Then make them pay in a way that keeps your soul intact. Expose them. Don't become them." Sophia blinked. The fog thickened. When it cleared, the porch was empty. The chair swayed once, then was still. She startled awake, air cold against the tear tracks on her cheeks. The room smelled faintly of burnt dust from the old heater clicking on. The bulletin board loomed in front of her, a chaotic testament to everything vile that Mark and Lena had built. Her hands curled into fists so tight her nails bit half-moons into her palms. Don't become them. But she would destroy them. That was a promise carved deeper than her scars. She stood and crossed to the board. Her eyes roved over the photos of the men at the dock, the cash flow charts she'd mocked up on scrap paper, the scan of a contract with a signature that didn't even pretend to be legitimate. Her hands moved almost of their own will, tracing the red string from image to image. When they stopped at Mark's smiling face, something hot and electric sparked through her chest. "You thought I was too weak to survive you," she whispered. "That's your mistake." The words felt alive on her tongue, a conjuring. Her rage was no longer a thing to be hidden or swallowed. It was a weapon precise and honed. She pulled her phone from her pocket, opened the recording app. For a moment she just stared at it, thumb hovering. Then she started speaking, narrating everything on her board in low, shaking tones. Dates, names, connections. It was sloppy, frantic, but it was hers. Insurance in case she didn't live long enough to deliver it herself. When she was done, she emailed the file to a new anonymous account she'd created at a library terminal that morning. Then she opened her encrypted storage app and began uploading every photograph, every scan. She stood over her phone like it was a small, fragile altar, waiting for the progress bar to finish. When it dinged complete, she let out a shuddering breath. Now they can't bury me without burying themselves. Her eyes drifted again to the center of the board. Mark's laughing face. Beneath it, a smaller printout, a crop still of Lena's profile, caught mid-smile at some charity gala diamond earrings glittering like tiny knives. Sophia's jaw tightened until it ached. For a heartbeat, she imagined her grandmother's hand settling on her shoulder, gentle grounding. Not to stop her, but to steady her. "I'll do this right," Sophia breathed. Her voice cracked. "And I'll make sure you never have to rock on that porch again, shaking your head because I was too soft to finish it." A tear slid down her cheek, but when she swiped it away, her fingers came back steady. This was more than revenge now. It was reclamation of her future, of every moment stolen when she lay broken and bleeding under their indifferent eyes. She turned off the light. Let darkness fill the room. Outside the window, Portland's streetlights burned haloed in the mist. The world seemed to hold its breath as if waiting to see whether she truly meant it. Sophia did. She lay on her bed with her phone clutched to her chest, the faint vibration of data still humming through it like a second heartbeat. Tomorrow she would move her pieces forward. Tomorrow she would drag every ugly secret into the sun. And tomorrow, finally, they would begin to pay. By the time Sophia pulled into the cracked driveway of the rental, her face was carefully neutral, her mind rehearsing the lines she'd decided on during the long drive back. Her hands still shook on the steering wheel. Each knuckle felt tight and brittle, like a single wrong word could snap them. Inside the house was bustling in a way it rarely was. Lena's bright, brittle laughter floated from the kitchen, mingling with the occasional clink of wine glasses. Mark's voice drifted in from the living room, low and assured, as he confirmed some final arrangement on his phone. Sophia forced a smile onto her lips. She slipped through the front door with a soft, practiced greeting. Her mother turned eyebrows arching with something almost like delight. "There you are. I was starting to think you'd gotten lost." Lena's eyes dropped to Sophia's small overnight bag. "You packed already?" Sophia nodded, letting her shoulders roll forward, looking small and uncertain. "You said we were leaving tomorrow. I didn't want to slow anything down." Mark appeared behind Lena's phone, still in hand. "Smart girl," he said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Costa Rica's going to be the clean start we all need. Sunshine, no more gray. Leave all this behind." Especially the crimes, Sophia thought. But she just nodded again, biting her lip in a way that suggested anxious gratitude. Mark's phone buzzed again. "I'll be in the office. Call me if anything comes up." He disappeared down the hall, footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. Lena turned back to her wine, swirling it idly, her nails tapping the glass in a rhythm that made Sophia's teeth hurt. "I'll be upstairs," Sophia murmured. "Don't be long," Lena called lightly. "We still have reservations tonight, our last farewell Portland dinner." Upstairs, Sophia's pulse surged painfully. She went straight to the door of Mark's office, easing it open just enough to slip inside. The smell hit her immediately, stale cologne, faint printer heat, a ghost of cigarette smoke from nights Mark sat hunched over his accounts chain, smoking by the cracked window. Her throat tightened. His laptop sat open on the massive mahogany desk screensaver, bouncing a corporate logo lazily across the monitor. Sophia crept around the chair, pulled the tiny external hard drive from her pocket. Her hands were so slick with sweat it almost slipped. She plugged it in. The computer woke with a soft ping. Her stomach clenched. Each second felt like standing naked under a spotlight. The desktop loaded to an open folder of financial summaries. So casual, so obvious. He was arrogant enough to leave it all sitting out. Why wouldn't he be? Who would ever dare betray him? Her grandmother's voice floated up from somewhere deep in her chest. "It's only arrogance if it's never challenged, Sophia. Otherwise, it's just the edge of the cliff." She opened the folder. A dozen spreadsheets blinked back at her quarterly breakdowns for the restaurant chain, massive numbers shuffling back and forth between consulting entities in Moscow, Seoul, and Belize. Sophia clicked faster, fighting the trembling that threatened to turn her fingers to water. Then she found it. A single Excel file innocuously named Projected Q4 Dividends. She opened it and nearly staggered. It wasn't just projections, it was the entire scheme, a flowchart laid out in chilling detail, arrows from shell company to shell company, each accompanied by dates, initials of local government officials with dollar figures next to their names. It was a bribe ledger, proof of how Mark had greased the city inspectors, the tax auditors, the local zoning board. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She selected it all, dropped it into her external drive. The progress bar crawled, 35%, 50%. Behind her, the house groaned. A door closed somewhere, or maybe it was just the wind. Either way, sweat prickled under her arms. She darted back to the main directory, found a folder simply named Miss C Contracts. Inside were PDFs of property deeds across Oregon and Washington, all signed under a dizzying array of shell corporations. Notes in Mark's scrawl beside them. Quick flip check, new liquor permits. 70%, 80%. Her knees started to buckle. She pressed her free hand to the edge of the desk to steady herself. Each second was agony, stretched tight like piano wire ready to snap. Finally, transfer complete. She yanked the drive free, shoved it deep into her pocket. Her body nearly doubled over in relief. But then the adrenaline drained, leaving only a nauseating hollow. She stumbled from the office, not daring to breathe until she shut herself into the small upstairs bathroom. The door clicked. She flipped the lock. Only then did she sink to the cold tile floor. The room smelled of lemon cleaner and cheap lavender soap. Her stomach heaved, and for a moment she thought she might vomit. Instead, she pulled her knees tight to her chest, rocked slightly, and let hot tears track down her cheeks. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was grief. A kind of slow mourning for the version of her life where this wasn't necessary, where her mother wasn't a woman who would sell her out for a foreign villa, where Mark wasn't a predator dressed in business casual. She pressed her hand to the simple silver pendant at her throat, the last thing of her grandmother's that hadn't been pawned off to pay old gambling debts. It had once dangled from a bright chain of delicate links, but the chain broke years ago. Sophia now wore it on a rough cord tied 3 times for luck. "You were made for bigger things, Sophia." Her grandmother's voice again, close enough she could almost feel the familiar hands smoothing her hair back. But bigger doesn't mean crueler. It means braver. Sophia let out a sob that tore its way up from somewhere so deep it tasted like salt and metal. Her shoulders shook. The pendant dug into her palm. She held it tighter until the bite of the metal anchored her back into the present. When the tears finally slowed, Sophia sucked in a shaky breath and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The woman in the foggy bathroom mirror looked hollowed-out eyes, red face pale under the harsh overhead light. But something burned there too, a furious, unbreakable ember. They would pay. All of them, and she'd make sure it happened in a way that left her grandmother proud wherever she was. Sophia stood. Her legs still wobbled, but each step back toward the door was steadier. She splashed water on her face, let it run cool over her skin until the worst of the trembling eased. Then she pressed her fingers to the pendant one last time. When she finally walked out into the dim hallway, shoulders squared, she looked almost the same. Almost, except for the spark in her eyes. Mark and Lena were about to board a plane to Costa Rica with passports inked in blood money. They had no idea that the reckoning was already in motion, carried in the tiny hard drive burning a hole in Sophia's pocket. And if that weight threatened to break her, so be it. She'd let it, as long as it broke them first. The night before they were supposed to fly out, the hotel felt like it was holding its breath. Mark and Lena had insisted on staying in a suite near the airport to avoid any last-minute complications. Sophia suspected it was more about indulging one final show of luxury before they disappeared across borders with their stolen fortune. The room was lavish, wrapped in warm golds and deep blues, the city lights outside painting slow rivers of orange across the carpet. Lena fussed with her makeup bag in the bathroom, reapplying a face mask that smelled of cucumbers and chemicals. Mark stood by the floor-to-ceiling window phone pressed to his ear, voice low and satisfied. "It'll clear in the Caymans by Tuesday. The transfer's already queued. Yes, I'm aware what that means for final dispersal. You'll have your cut." Sophia lay on the edge of the bed, feigning exhaustion, eyes half closed. Her body was turned just enough that they couldn't see her hands working at her phone. Each press of her thumb was deliberate paced, so her breathing wouldn't give her away. The secure folder loaded. Every file, every damning photograph, every voice memo she'd recorded, from the trembling whispers in the hospital to the venomous slip-ups at dinner tables, wire diagrams of shell companies, the bribe ledger from Mark's hard drive. It all waited there, nestled under a bland file name that would mean nothing to anyone else. She opened her encrypted email client, typed slowly, methodically. Subject: urgent financial and human exploitation crimes, Portland-Seattle nexus. Body: this is provided in good faith and under personal risk. Contained is documentation of extensive money laundering operations, international wire fraud, and probable trafficking activity centered in the Pacific Northwest with extensions into Latin America and Eastern Europe. Included are corroborating financial records, photographic evidence, and recordings of direct confessions. Consider this an anonymous whistleblower report. A former witness who survived. Sophia attached the zip file. Her hands trembled. She stilled them by digging her nails into her thigh through her jeans. She hovered for a second, then pressed send. It was done. In one soft click that vanished into digital ether, she'd set 1,000 dominoes toppling. Sophia locked herself in the bathroom under the guise of needing to rebandage one of her burns. The mirror showed a pale woman with stark eyes, hair limp from nervous sweat. She rinsed her face, forced slow breaths. When she stepped back into the suite, Mark barely looked up. Lena just gave her a fleeting glance, eyes narrowed as if trying to read some invisible guilt. "Be ready by 6, Mark said. "Car's coming at 1:30. Don't slow us down." Sophia nodded. Her voice would have cracked if she tried words. It was nearly midnight when she slipped out. Mark was sprawled across the bed, snoring softly, one arm thrown wide, phone on the nightstand still glowing with missed alerts. Lena had taken a sedative, something she'd proudly announced would keep her fresh for customs. Sophia closed the door behind her with painstaking care. Her room key weighed warm and heavy in her pocket. Her breath shook in her chest. But once the latch clicked, once the carpeted hallway lay empty before her, a giddy, terrified laugh almost clawed up her throat. She didn't take the elevator. Too loud. Too exposed. She padded barefoot down the hall to the emergency stairs, sneakers dangling from her fingers. Only when she hit the cool concrete of the stairwell did she slip them on, tying the laces with a quick precision that felt surgical. Each floor she passed felt like a layer peeling off her. By the time she reached the lobby, she was almost lightheaded. Outside, the Portland air slapped her awake. Still damp from earlier rain, still threaded with exhaust and the faint brine from the river. Neon signs buzzed in the distance. A cab idled by the curb, the driver's smoking eyes half-lidded from boredom. He didn't even flinch when she slid into the back seat. "Anywhere particular," he drawled. "Just find me a cafe, someplace that doesn't close." He shrugged, flicked his cigarette into the gutter, and pulled away from the curb. 15 minutes later, she sat in a battered vinyl booth at a 24-hour diner on the east side, staring at a mug of coffee that smelled burnt and perfect. The place was nearly empty. A couple of college kids hunched over laptops, an old man in the corner talking to himself. The waitress didn't look twice at Sophia, only refilled her mug with a tired nod. It was exactly what she needed, anonymous, uninterested. Sophia wrapped her hands around the mug, let the heat bite into her cold fingers. The adrenaline was ebbing, leaving her muscles watery and slack. Her body wanted to collapse forward to finally release the weight of every lie, every moment of pretending. But she forced herself to sit upright, because somewhere out there, men and women she would never meet were opening her files, listening to Lena's icy voice tally human lives like prophets, watching Mark lean in close to a mafia go-between hands exchanging envelopes under sodium lights. And she wanted to be fully awake when it all began to unravel. Her phone buzzed once, just a background system ping, nothing personal. Still, it made her heart jolt so violently, she nearly knocked over her coffee. She sucked in a slow breath, pressed her palm flat to her chest to calm the erratic beat. Her grandmother's pendant was warm under her touch, catching the tiny fluorescent lights overhead. "It's not bravery if you're never scared, Sophia. It's just arrogance. Bravery means being terrified and stepping forward anyway." She mouthed the words silently, like a litany. Then she drew her thumb over the curve of the pendant. This, all of it, had become something bigger than revenge, bigger even than survival. It was a promise to every version of herself who'd lain awake in the dark, straining to hear affection in a mother's footstep that never came, or mercy in a stepfather's voice that only ever dripped with calculation. She lifted the mug, let the bitter liquid scald her tongue, and didn't flinch. Hours slipped by. The city outside the diner's broad, fingerprint-smudged windows crawled on without noticing her. Cars whooshed past. A bus belched to a stop, then rumbled on. Somewhere, a siren wound up, spiraled away. It might already have started. Some midnight clerk at the FBI could be flagging her files, eyes widening, calling in a supervisor. Maybe within hours, agents would be knocking on doors, freezing accounts, pulling phone records. She felt no triumph, no smug glow of vengeance, only an exhausted certainty that this was how it had to end. because if she didn't destroy them now, they would keep spreading. Like rot, like plague. They would move their empire south to Costa Rica, maybe buy politicians there the same way they bought them in Oregon, keep trafficking girls who looked disturbingly like she once did lost hopeful too tender. Not anymore. The waitress returned with a fresh pot, gave Sophia a curious look. Long night. Sophia managed a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. The longest. Well, the woman said, topping her off, hope it turns around before morning. Sophia watched the dark liquid swirl, catching tiny fractured reflections of neon signs outside. It already is, she whispered. And with that, she settled back into the booth, eyes wide open, ready to watch the sun come up on the beginning of the end. It began with a pair of dark SUVs rolling up to the curb outside the hotel. They didn't come with sirens or squealing tires. The air around them seemed to tighten on its own, like the very street had tensed up to watch. Their doors opened almost in unison, black-suited agents stepping out with that quiet, terrifying purpose only federal law enforcement seemed to carry. Sophia sat at her table by the window in the diner across the street, hands cradling a cup that had long since gone cold. The neon sign outside buzzed above her head, flickering pink over her face, but her eyes never left the scene unfolding beyond the glass. Across 4 lanes of rain-slick asphalt, the hotel's revolving doors gleamed under a chandelier that probably cost more than Sophia had made in a year at the PI firm. The doors turned once, twice, and then Mark emerged. He looked relaxed, almost jaunty in his slate blazer and open collar. In his hand was a phone thumb scrolling through what Sophia imagined were wire confirmations and congratulatory texts from silent partners. 2 agents intercepted him before he could take more than 3 steps. They didn't so much tackle as surround hands on his arms, another gripping his shoulder. Mark's whole body jolted. His mouth moved around words that never reached Sophia's ears. From where she sat, it almost looked like he was smiling, confusion sliding off his face, replaced by slow, dawning horror. Behind him, Lena appeared in a swirl of cashmere and perfume. Her mouth was already open, a shriek Sophia couldn't hear, but somehow felt all the same vibrating down into her chest. Lena lunged toward Mark, hands clawing at the agents who spun her effortlessly away. Another 2 officers stepped up, gloves tight around their wrists, and one neatly twisted Lena's arms behind her back. Her scream cut through even the thick diner glass, high and brittle. Mark, don't just stand there, do something." Sophia's breath hitched, tears blurring the edges of her vision. Her mother still wearing soft house shoes, her hair pinned in a loose travel bun, ready for the flight that would never come, bucked in their grip like a wild thing. Even with wrists cuffed, she twisted to face Mark, who stood slack-mouthed, the lines of his jaw hardening with helpless rage. "It's a mistake!" Lena howled, voice cracking into something raw. "We have lawyers, you can't—" Her head snapped back when one of the agents gave her a sharp, quiet command and nudged her toward the waiting SUV. Tears streaked her mascara in jagged rivers. The other agent leaned close to Mark, murmured something, and Mark's shoulders sank like all the air had been punched out of him. The federal convoy loaded them in with smooth, chilling efficiency. Doors slammed shut, the engines rumbled to life. Sophia couldn't move. Her hand clamped so hard around her coffee mug she felt the ceramic grown hot pressure building along her thumb. The window glass between her and the street felt suddenly too thin, like if she leaned forward it might shatter and she'd tumble right back into that lobby, right into her mother's hysterical wails, right into Mark's eyes narrowing in poisonous recognition. But no, the cars pulled away, tires whispering over wet asphalt. The taillights turned the corner and vanished. A sob clawed up her throat, stopped at the base of her tongue. Her eyes flooded, 2 fat tears breaking loose to slide down her cheeks, dripping onto her wrist. She let them fall, made no move to wipe them away. Across the street, a doorman stood stunned under the awning, his hat askew. Guests gathered in small, gossiping clusters by the decorative planters' hands pressed to mouths, eyes wide. Phones appeared like tiny nervous birds snapping photos, recording videos that would surface on local news by evening. Look at them, Sophia thought. Look at the empire you tried to build on my bones. Watch it scatter like cockroaches in daylight. She leaned back slowly into the booth, head resting against the cracked vinyl. Her eyes fell shut, a shaky exhale pushing through her lips. A waitress passed, footsteps squeaking on the linoleum, then returned to drop off the check. Sophia didn't open her eyes, just nodded, her face slack with relief so profound it hurt. Then, in a slow-motion detail her mind would replay forever, a droplet of coffee trembled on the edge of the mug she'd been gripping, clung there for a breath, then let go. It hit the floor with a tiny dark splash. In that absurd, delicate instant, Sophia felt the bitterness inside her. The coiled knot of fear and betrayal and desperate rage dissolved just a little. Like that drop was carrying a piece of her hatred away, leaving only raw, tender ache behind. She released her hold on the cup. Her hands dropped into her lap, palms up, fingers faintly twitching like they hadn't realized they were free. Her eyes fluttered open. Through the diner window, the hotel lobby was emptying out. Just staff now smoothing down jackets, brushing off imaginary dust, trying to pretend their luxury entrance hadn't just hosted the fall of an empire. Sophia ran her fingers over the silver pendant at her throat, the coolness grounding her. Her grandmother's words came again, not in the stormy, cautioning tones of her nightmares, but gentle like warm breath against her hair. "You did what you had to, sweetheart. You're still here, and they're finally where they belong." She rose from the booth on legs that felt soft and untested, left a pile of crumpled bills by the check without bothering to count them. The bell over the door chimed as she stepped into Portland's damp morning. The air was brisk, filled with the scent of wet asphalt and brewing coffee from a cart down the block. A gull wheeled overhead, its lonely call so sharp it sliced through the last of her trembling. Sophia tilted her face up. The gray sky was splitting along faint white seams like the day was deciding to try for sun after all. And somewhere far behind her, in holding cells that stank of cold metal and sour sweat, the people who taught her the true cost of family were learning they'd lost everything. Their wealth, their reputation, their freedom. Her chest tightened. Not from grief, though that would probably come later in sleepless hours and startled dreams, but from a deep, echoing release. She walked away from the diner with slow, deliberate steps. Each footfall felt like a small declaration. Not of triumph. Not yet, but of survival, of finally being allowed to breathe without always tasting blood. Sophia didn't look back at the hotel. There was nothing there worth seeing again. Instead, she pressed her hand flat over her heart, felt the pendant burn cool into her skin, and let a tiny, tremulous smile crack across her face. Some debts had finally been paid. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the world ahead of her didn't feel like a trap. It felt breathtakingly like hers. The tiny apartment by the Oregon coast smelled like salt and old wood, a scent Sophia had come to crave. It clung to her hair, her clothes to the thin curtains that never quite kept out the tang of the Pacific. When she first moved in, the landlord apologized for the constant damp. Now she found it comforting, a living breath that filled the space with something honest. She closed the door behind her with deliberate care, listening as the latch clicked into place. Safe. Alone. The small living area was lit only by a string of battered fairy lights tacked along the ceiling. They threw delicate reflections over the battered coffee table where she'd laid out every scrap of her former war. The voice recorder, its red LED, now a dead eye. The thumb drive Drew had given her at the PI office, even scraps of hand-scribbled notes that still smelled faintly of the industrial printer ink from long hours spent collating evidence. It looked almost clinical laid out like that, a surgeon's table of old wounds. Sophia pulled a small ceramic bowl into the center of it all, set down a box of kitchen matches beside it. Then she sank into the threadbare armchair, the same one she'd found on the curb 3 streets over, with springs that sighed under her weight. Her hands trembled as she picked up the recorder first. Its plastic was warm, almost intimate from the hours it had spent hidden against her skin under pillows taped to the underside of tables. She thought about every whisper it had captured. Lena's dismissive laugh. "She's just a burden." Mark's voice curling around threats masked as casual observations. "We could always have another surgery lined up if she stops being grateful." Her stomach twisted. She clicked it on one last time. The tiny speaker hissed, then filled the apartment with ghost voices. Her mother's lilt, her stepfather's oily reassurances. It was all so small now, trapped inside this fragile shell. She clicked it off. The silence was so profound it rang in her ears. Then she struck a match. The sulfur flared bright, sharp, almost sweet. She touched it to the recorder. Plastic melted, curled back with a faint toxic scent. Sophia's eyes watered, but she didn't look away. She held it over the bowl until the flame ran out, then dropped it in, watched it sputter die and leave behind a twisted husk. Next went the thumb drive, the very first repository of everything she'd risked. It slid into the flame with barely a struggle, the metal shell warping the plastic, blackening into oily smears. She fed the notes in sheet by sheet, the handwriting blurred edges curling inward. When it caught, the fire climbed fast, almost greedy. Names of account managers, local cops who took payoffs, coded messages about goods arriving on container ships, they all vanished into soft gray curls of ash. By the end, the bowl was a shallow grave, shreds of blackened evidence, flakes of scorched confessions. Sophia exhaled so long and slow her ribs ached. When it was done, she leaned back and reached for the final thing on the table. A small, weather-worn photo tucked into the corner of her grandmother's favorite picture frame, a simple white wood piece that had chipped along one edge. In the photo, her grandmother sat on the porch of their old house, the Oregon dunes, stretching off behind her hair, pinned-up mouth caught mid-laugh. Beside her stood a much younger Sophia, maybe 8 or 9, leaning into that laughter, eyes squinted against the sun. Their hands were clasped like they'd been dancing just before the shutter clicked. It was the only relic she couldn't bear to burn. That night, sleep came surprisingly gently. No thrashing dreams of locked hospital rooms, no echo of Lena's cold hand stroking her hair with hidden knives in her voice. Just a drifting, as if the ocean outside had risen up to rock her in its tide. She opened her eyes inside the dream and found herself standing on damp sand. The beach stretched out in both directions, wind brushing across her bare shoulders. The air smelled of salt and wood smoke, familiar and devastating. Her grandmother stood a few yards away, facing the surf. Her cardigan was buttoned wrong, the way it always had been when she was in a hurry, hair pinned up with a loose silver comb. When she turned, her eyes shone crinkled at the edges with unspent laughter. Sophia's breath hitched, a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. Then she ran. Their hands met like they had 1,000 times before, warm, dry, pulling her close. Her grandmother's thumb stroked over the knuckles that still carried tiny, pale scars from childhood scrapes. "Look at you," her grandmother said, voice low and rich, the Oregon coast folding around it like an embrace. "Look how far you've come." Sophia tried to speak, found her throat too tight. Tears pricked hot at her lashes. Her grandmother's hands squeezed hers. They began walking along the waterline, feet sinking into the cool, wet sand. Waves spilled over their toes, then slipped back as if reluctant to let them go. "You were always stronger than they knew. You know that?" Her grandmother's smile softened. "Stronger than you knew, too." Sophia swallowed hard, blinked up at the shifting gray sky. "I thought it would destroy me, loving them, having to destroy them in the end." "It didn't," her grandmother said simply. "You're still here. You're living, not just surviving. That was always the difference, Sophia." They stopped. Her grandmother turned to her, fully hands rising to cradle her face. Her touch was warm, gentle thumb brushing away tears that hadn't fallen yet. "You've done enough. You've proven enough. Now you can live for yourself. That's all I ever wanted for you." Sophia leaned into the touch, eyes closing, tears slipping free at last. The wind caught them, carried them out to sea. When she opened her eyes again, the dream began to fade around the edges. Her grandmother stood, bathed in a light that wasn't quite sun-smiling, that same gentle, unbreakable smile. "You've always been enough, Sophia, always." She woke with the taste of salt on her lips, not knowing if it came from the ocean breeze or her own tears. Outside her window, the sky was pale early light sifting through a scatter of thin clouds. A gull wheeled by its cry, sharp alive. Somewhere down the block, a boat horn sounded steady and unhurried. Sophia pressed her hand over the pendant at her throat, felt its small, steady weight. Then she reached for the photo on her nightstand, ran her thumb along the edge of the frame. "You were right," she whispered into the stillness. "I am strong enough, and I'm finally going to live like it." She set the photo carefully back in its place, rose and stepped barefoot onto the cool wood floor. The day outside waited clean, uncertain, entirely hers, and this time she was ready. It was late morning by the time Sophia arrived at the beach, the sun already perched high, burning away the last of the coastal fog. The shoreline stretched wide and bright, dotted with bright umbrellas and families who'd come to soak in the promise of a warm Oregon day. Gulls drifted overhead, their shadows slicing across the sand. Near the shallow break where the small waves folded over themselves in gentle sighs, Sophia's students were already gathering. A mismatched parade of kids, some clutching second-hand foam boards that looked almost bigger than they were. Their laughter tumbled across the beach, tangled with the salt wind. Sophia pulled her truck into the gravel lot, windows down, so she could catch the sea's bright breath. The scent of brine and sun-warmed kelp poured in. Her heart clenched so unexpectedly she had to press a hand over it, not from pain this time, but something sharper and somehow sweeter. Relief. The simple, astounding luxury of being here, being free. She hopped out, dropped the tailgate, and started unloading smaller boards she kept for beginners. Her shoulder twinged, the one that still bore faint strains from surgeries long ago, but it wasn't a sharp pain anymore, Just a reminder, a ghost of what she'd come through. Miss Sophia. A voice cut through her thoughts, bright as gull song. She turned to see Lily barreling down the sand, sun-bleached hair flying. Her board shorts were too long, slapping against skinny calves as she ran. Sophia's grin broke out so fast it almost startled her. She set the board aside just in time to catch Lily's collision-hugged small arms wrapping around Sophia's waist. "You're early," Sophia laughed, ruffling the top of the girl's head. "I thought you were afraid of cold water." But I practiced holding my breath in the bathtub." "Look," Lily puffed out her cheeks in demonstration, eyes round with pride. Sophia couldn't help it. She threw her head back and laughed, the sound spilling free and easy. It felt shockingly good to let it pour out unguarded. "All right, champion breath holder, grab your leash, we'll start warm-ups." More kids gathered, parents lingering at the edges with cell phones poised. Sophia led them through goofy stretches on the sand, demonstrating how to pop up on boards with exaggerated playful clumsiness. The children giggled every time she pretended to wipe out legs flailing. One small boy mimicked her so enthusiastically he toppled backward, bursting into helpless giggles. The sun climbed higher, pouring gold across everything. Tiny sparkles danced over the water's surface, where it met the pale curve of Tillamook Bay. Sophia knelt by a boy who was tying the leash around his ankle, guiding his fingers with patient hands. Her own hands were steady now, sure of what they were doing, not just with the leash but with life itself. At one point, while demonstrating how to paddle out, Sophia's shirt rode up slightly. The kid's eyes flicked curiously to the silvery scar that twisted along her collarbone, catching the sun like a faint river. Sophia didn't tug the fabric back down. She let it show. And after only a heartbeat of awkward silence, the children's attention skittered off. Back to the boards, back to who could catch the first foam wave. No hushed whispers, no cruel pointing. Just fleeting curiosity, and then the bright insistence of play. It was the first time she'd ever felt that scar was simply part of her, not a banner of pain to hide. They were nearly done for the day when Lily approached again, dragging a tiny cooler behind her like it weighed more than she did. "Miss Sophia," she said shyly, cheeks flushed pink from the sun, "I made you something." Sophia blinked, hands paused mid-wax on a board. "For me?" "Uh-huh." Lily popped open the cooler with dramatic flair. Inside was a neat little tangle of tiny shells, rough twine, and brightly colored beads. It took Sophia a second to see it for what it was, a bracelet strung together with lopsided earnestness. "It's so you remember us, even when it's winter and we can't surf." Lily twisted her hands, anxious suddenly. "You don't have to wear it if it's too silly." Sophia didn't let her finish. She dropped to her knees in the sand, ignoring the way it scraped her skin, and pulled Lily into a hug that lifted the girl clear off her feet. The little cooler toppled over, sending an extra shell skittering across the sand. "It's perfect," Sophia whispered into Lily's hair, her voice catching. "It's the most perfect thing I've ever been given." When she pulled back, her eyes blurred with tears that spilled hot and fast. Lily just beamed, then gently slipped the bracelet over Sophia's wrist. It settled against the silver pendant of her grandmother's necklace shells, clacking together in a delicate greeting. The children ran ahead after that, racing to dunk themselves one last time before their parents hauled them away for dry towels and car rides home. Sophia stayed where she was for a moment, kneeling in the sand, head bowed. Her tears dripped onto the bracelet, darkening the rough twine. But they weren't tears of grief. They were something messier, richer. A mourning for all the years she'd spent wanting love from people who only measured her in terms of worth and weakness. A quiet thank you that it hadn't killed her spirit, only tempered it. She stood, dusted off her legs, and walked down to the water's edge. The waves lapped over her feet, cold enough to sting, anchoring her back to the bright immediacy of the day. Behind her, the children's laughter floated like bright kites on the wind. Sophia touched the bracelet lightly. The tiny shells were warm from the sun, rough under her fingertips. Each one felt like a tiny heartbeat, a fragile promise that not all bonds hurt. Some simply existed to remind her that tenderness could survive anything, even betrayal, even scars. A breeze lifted her hair, tangled it around her throat in a salty whisper. For a moment she closed her eyes, imagined her grandmother standing just beyond the line of Dune's cardigan buttons, still wrong, smile wide and knowing. "Told you, sweetheart. You were always meant to dance in the sun, not hide from it." Sophia breathed out a soft, unsteady laugh. Then she stepped forward, deeper into the shallows, boards floating by her knees, tiny feet splashing around her. When one child shrieked her name, not in fear or accusation but delight, she turned toward them, hands lifted in open invitation. The scar on her throat caught the sunlight again, no longer a secret, no longer a wound that demanded apology. And this time when Sophia smiled, it was with every part of herself, unhidden, unafraid, completely radiantly alive. It was long past twilight when Sophia stepped out onto the narrow balcony of her small apartment. The night had unfurled itself over Tillamook Bay, a wide stretch of indigo sky scattered with cold pinpricks of stars. The last traces of sunlight had sunk behind the western horizon hours ago, leaving only the slow pulse of the moonlight on water and the distant glow of the coastal town cradled between the dunes. She wore a loose sweater pulled over her shoulders, sleeves too long, cuffs rolled back twice. The air was cool, tinged with salt. Each time she inhaled, it carried the promise of tides that never ceased, of something vast, uncaring and strangely comforting. Beneath her hand, the wooden railing was rough with splinters worn by years of salt spray. Her fingers traced its ridges absently, as if memorizing a story written by countless storms. Somewhere far below, waves broke against the jetties, the sound steady and unhurried. It was a night built for confessions, and the quiet was so complete that it almost seemed to wait for hers. Sophia closed her eyes. Inside the dark behind her lids, the faces of her mother and Mark flickered, sometimes cold and twisted with calculation, sometimes laughing in old snapshots from birthdays long buried. Ghosts that refused to settle into just one form. They still haunted corners of her mind, rising up when the world went quiet, whispering all the ways they'd measured her and found her wanting. But then beneath it, something else bloomed. Not forgiveness for them, she doubted she would ever grant that. It was something more fragile, more necessary, a gentle reaching out to the girl she had been, the one who'd lain in a hospital bed with tubes in her arms, whispering apologies to no one certain her worth ended with her usefulness. A tear slipped out hot against her cheek. Sophia let it fall. She wrapped her arms around herself and whispered into the salt, thick wind voice, breaking on the first syllables, "I forgive myself first." The words came out raw, stripped of ceremony, so simple they startled her. She repeated them stronger this time. "I forgive myself for not seeing sooner, for hoping too long, for breaking in ways I thought were my fault." Her breath shuddered. The ocean answered with a distant crash that seemed to echo up the cliffside and wrap around her shoulders. She opened her eyes, the horizon a dark blur against the ink-black water. Somewhere out there was the curve of the world bending away from her, leading to places she might never stand. And that was all right. Here was enough. She leaned forward, elbows on the rail. Her pendant, her grandmother's, slipped out from beneath her sweater, swinging gently over the edge. "For them?" she said, voice quieter now, almost lost to the surf. "I leave it to the law, to the justice they thought they were too clever to ever face." Her lips curved in a small, tired smile that felt deeper than triumph. Let the judges and cell doors do their part. Let the media chew over the scandal of a man who'd shaken hands with foreign criminals, who'd used his family like expendable assets in a balance sheet. Sophia was done carrying the weight of their sins. The reckoning no longer needed her hand to guide it. A soft wind kicked up off the water, then tugging at her hair, threading it across her mouth until she laughed, startled honest, the sound flying away down the dark beach. For the first time in so many years, there was no tremor beneath her laughter. No aftertaste of fear, just the warm thrum of her own heartbeat and the heavy sweetness of being undeniably imperfectly alive. She tipped her head back, eyes tracing the scattered constellations that hung low over the bay. The sea sang below her, patient and eternal. Waves rolled in with small white hands that reached for the rocks, then slipped away again. Each rush and retreat sounded like the deep exhale of something older than every sorrow she carried. When she closed her eyes again, she didn't see Mark's calculating frown or Lena's scorn curling her mouth. Instead, there was the image of her grandmother perched on that familiar porch cardigan, buttoned wrong, smiling as if all the world's troubles were small enough to fit in her teacup. Sophia whispered to that memory, a soft promise drifting into the darkness. "I'll live the way you hoped for me. I'll be happy even with all the cracks." She thought she felt a faint pressure at her shoulder, then like the brush of an old hand, gentle and approving. But when she opened her eyes, there was only the restless dark and the glitter of town lights across the curve of the bay. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she let her back press against the wall of her apartment. She slid down until she was seated on the weather-worn board's legs pulled close. The breeze played with the loose ends of her hair. Somewhere far off, a buoy bell rang, lonely and sure. The camera would pull back here if this were a film, drawing away from her small figure wrapped in twilight, from the quiet dignity of her tears drying on salt-chilled cheeks. It would climb above the roofline of the small building past the soft glow leaking from neighboring windows higher still, until the entire little town sat nestled like a handful of fallen stars against the black swell of the Pacific. Down below, Sophia's hair lifted in the wind, pale against her sweater, her pendant catching a final glint of light. She looked tiny, but not fragile, not anymore. The lens would catch the slow roll of the waves crashing against the dark jetties, white froth turning to lace that slipped back into the ocean's dark mouth. The endless cycle, a lullaby sung by salt and water and moon. A car door slammed somewhere down the block. A dog barked twice, then settled. The normalness of it, life carrying on oblivious to the wreckage she'd survived, and the battles she'd won nearly undid her. But Sophia only closed her eyes, let the salt wind dance over her upturned face, and smiled again. It was smaller this time, quieter, but impossibly real. When she finally stood brushing sand and salt from her jeans, she turned to slip back inside. The apartment was waiting with its mismatched furniture and faint smell of brewed tea. The floor would creak the same way it always did. Tomorrow there'd be lessons to plan groceries, to pick up children's laughter, to meet her on the beach. A life that asked nothing more from her than to simply live it. As the door clicked shut behind her, the camera would stay outside, holding on the empty balcony, the sea still talking to itself far below. The wind tugged a forgotten towel from the railing, sent it fluttering like a small awkward bird down to the sand. And just before the screen faded to black, the soft, unhurried cadence of waves filled the silence, steady, tender, eternal, carrying her story onward to wherever it next needed to be heard.